My name is Cherrie Dubois, and I was born and raised in Reading, and I've actually lived here all my life. I started coming to Highland School in the first grade in the days before kindergarten in 1953, and I was here until the fire in March of 1957. And at that point, all the kids here were on double session at Pearl Street School, which is now Longwood Place. So, and then in the fall of 1957, Birch Meadow School opened, so I would have ended my association with Highland School in June of 1957 anyway. And since then, I've been involved with the library, so it's in a way it's as if I never left. I worked on the committee that helped to turn this building into the library, and then I've been a trustee for various times over the last 30 years. So. Most of the time.
Having been an educator during your professional life and continuing to be an educator, do you have any aspects that you'd like to share with us from the teacher's point of view of working in a building like this, or how it was as a student when you were here?
I thought this was a really awesome school. I love coming to school here, except in second grade. We'll go into that in a moment. Mrs. Leslie was my first grade teacher, and she had also been my brother's first grade teacher. And so I learned to read in this building, so that was really special. And now that it's a library, reading is clearly a really important aspect of what the building continues to do. I had a wonderful time here at school. I was really disappointed when the fire occurred. I can remember my mother telling me in the morning, and she wasn't sure how I was going to take it because she knew that I liked the school and I liked going here. So, so I think all the kids were pretty disappointed not to be able to continue to go to school here at this place. Second grade, my second grade teacher was Miss Cronin, and she kind of scared me. My brother had her too, but she became ill fairly early in the year. And I was always afraid she was going to come back to school and she would hug us, and I didn't want to be hugged by Miss Cronin. I don't know why, but she just kind of scared me. So for much of the year, we had a substitute teacher, Mrs. Rosenthal, who lives in Reading, and she was wonderful. I think all the kids really, really liked her. And at the end of the year, she was the one who actually informed us that Miss Cronin had died during the year. And so that perhaps was why, I believe she had cancer, and that perhaps was why she was kind of not in a very good mood and not as easy a person to get along with when the school year began. So.
Now, Mrs. Leslie was here yesterday.
Not the same one. It wouldn't have been the same one.
No?
No, this Mrs. Leslie that I had was probably, she had grown-up children when I had her, so she was older than my parents by probably half a generation. So unless I know she's dead, so okay. she unless she came back to life, she couldn't have come. No way.
There's a wonderful Barbara Leslie who was here yesterday and is coming back on Saturday.
My Mrs. Leslie was Dorothy, and she actually lived on Deering Street, just a few houses down from the school.
Oh, that's neat. So what else did you learn? Were you a bus rider at the time of the fire?
I did. I rode the bus, as did most of the kids who lived in my area of town, and we did sing songs on the bus.
I've heard about a song.
Yes, and one of the songs was called "Let the School Burn Down," and it was a popular one. It was sung frequently. It was, "Oh, let the school burn down, burn it to the ground, open up your hearts, so let the school burn down." Now, we sang other songs, too, including Found a Peanut. That was a popular one. It was started out, found a peanut, found a peanut, found a peanut last night. Last night I found a peanut last night. The second verse was, it was rotten, and the following verse was, ate it anyway. And the following verse was about getting sick, and then eventually you die and you go to heaven. And it went on. It was about as long as 99 bottles of beer on the wall, actually. But it was good entertainment riding home from school in the bus.
Oh, that's great. I find it amusing that, or maybe amazing, that you sang songs on the bus when it wasn't a class trip with the teacher in charge. Was there a bus monitor or
No,
something like that?
no, just the bus driver, and everybody liked the bus driver. We called him Spider. I don't know what his real name was, but he was called Spider, and he was a nice guy, and he seemed to tolerate us pretty well, so it worked out fine.
Yeah.
He never yelled at us, and that I recall.
So that song about Found a Peanut must have lasted your entire ride to school. Since
Pretty
it would
much.
only be a few miles.
Pretty much. There are a lot of stops on the way, but the bus wound through Forest Street and up Van Norden and then down Franklin Street and Grove Street, and because there were, except for Joshua Eaton, there's Joshua Eaton, Prospect, Lowell Street, which was really small, only 4 rooms, and Highland. And so there was no Barrows, no Killam, Birch Meadow wasn't built yet, no Wood End.
School was no longer in existence.
No,
Okay.
I'm not that old.
I'm not sure of the date when it was.
Union, I think, was actually, well, I think it was a high school for a while too, but originally I think began as an elementary school.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have memories of the building when you were here as a student? What it was like?
I do. As I mentioned, there was the fire, and I remember when you wanted to go to the bathroom, you didn't ask to go to the lab. You asked to go to the basement because that's where the bathrooms were. One side was boys and one side was girls. My recollection is that in the actual area where the toilets were, you had to go up a couple of steps to get to the toilets themselves, and there was a row of them with doors and everything. And then you went out from that area into a smaller area where the sink was. And they had the crank soap. They'd put like a bar of ivory soap or something in there, and you'd crank it, and it would turn it out almost the way a rasp will turn out, fine grains of shavings of soap. It was about as big around as this table, so I guess 4.5 feet or so, something like that. And then kids would go over there. In the middle, there was a tube that was coming up through it, and at the top of the tube, there was a round ball, like sort of like the little round things you make loose tea in, except it was big around like this, like a softball or so. And
It had holes in it.
it did. It had holes in the bottom of it, and the water would come down, so that you get a bunch of kids standing around it, everybody washing their hands all at the same time. So it was pretty quick and efficient. I guess we must have gone over someplace else to pick up a paper towel to dry our hands, but clearly it was meant so that lots of kids could be at the sink at the same time, and it was the first school in town to have indoor plumbing, so it's a pretty big deal.
I read from articles in the Reading Chronicle from the 96, 97. The plumber charged, I believe it was just over $1,000 to do the plumbing for the entire school.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Sounds like a great deal. I don't think
Yeah.
you can get a plumber in for much. Like
No,
that.
that's what they
So-
charge, isn't it, for the call?
Right. There must have been a sink on the second floor for the kitchen.
On the second floor, yes. When it came to the cafeteria, what you had to do in the morning when you came to school, in the very beginning during opening exercises, you would have to say if you wanted to buy lunch or not, and you would pay for your lunch at that time, and they would write your name down. Well, they would write your initials down, and then you'd give them the quarter, which is what the lunch cost. And then the cafeteria ladies, Mrs. Davis was in charge of the cafeteria, and Mrs. Harvey was her assistant. And they would get the total count of the number of kids who were buying lunch that day, and then they would make the lunches. They were all hot lunches, and I think they did everything from scratch, or pretty much.
That's what the teacher said yesterday.
Yep. And then at Thanksgiving, they would actually roast turkeys, and you'd have a real turkey dinner here at school a few days before Thanksgiving. You had to walk the kitchen area was where the picture book room is now. When you go to the top of the stairs, you'll see the archways that are covered over, and that's where you would walk through to get into the kitchen. And you'd walk around, pick up all your stuff, and you had to walk your tray back to your room because there was no place to sit and eat. So you would bring it back to your room, to your desk to eat. The kids who lived nearby walked home to school and had lunch at home, so that the lunch period was fairly long, and the recess time was about well, we had enough time for kids to go home, get lunch, and come back again. So I think we probably had at least 20 minutes or a half an hour for recess, and probably lunch must have been close to an hour altogether, because they had and you went to the cafeteria by room. So it'd be, room 1 would go, and then room 2 would go, so that it wasn't a mad dash, and you didn't want kids bumping into each other carrying trays downstairs. The lower grades were on the first floor, and the 4th grade and up was on the 2nd floor.
And did you use the main staircase that exists now, or did you use the stairs and the turrets?
We used the main staircase to go up and down. The ones in the turrets were used for fire drills. And because it was the Cold War, we did our drills too, the bomb drills, by going underneath our desks. And, I don't know, I guess if the desk broke, you were dead meat. But
right in the classroom, you didn't go into the hallway?
No, right in the classroom. There were also cloakrooms. The rooms were on the outside, and then between the room and the hallway, there was an area that was where you could hang up your coats. There were hooks and everything for the kids to use. Everything was open. I mean, nothing was closed in. There were no lockers or anything like that. And of course, in those days, the girls had to wear skirts to school or dresses. And in the cold days, you'd put on a pair of slacks underneath your skirt, and then when you got to school, you take that off. Little kids used to have their mittens sometimes pinned together with a clothespin, and the teachers would help the little kids put their boots and stuff back on again when they were ready to go home.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this school?
In 4th grade, we actually got to use real fountain pens. We learned to write in 3rd grade. We learned cursive writing. We had the Reinhardt system, which is probably similar to Palmer, but I guess a little bit different. And we had a man who came in from the Reinhardt system to show us, and then our teachers would show us and teach us after that. But in 4th grade, we got to use ink, and we had inkwells in the desk. And my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Eastman, made a very big deal about this, about how grown up we were, because this was the day we were going to get our own ink in our own inkwell. We were going to get the little pen with a nib, and it was pretty cool. It was definitely being, grown up and in the real world here. Dusty Kilgore, who sat behind me, dunked my braids in the inkwell once. I had very long hair. Well, no. I had very long hair, and kids had always heard about dunking someone's hair in the inkwell, so the boy who sat behind me did that one day. My mother was not happy when I came home. I don't suppose Mrs. Eastman was very happy with Harold either. His real name was Harold, but we all called him Dusty.
So. We've heard tales of detentions. Do you remember anybody getting detentions in your class? I'm sure you didn't.
No, I never heard of anybody getting detention, not when I was in school. Kids maybe stayed after, but I don't recall anybody getting detention. I mean, I can't even remember anybody staying after, to be honest. There wasn't much of that sort of thing going on. I do remember, though, the playground area, which was where the parking lot is now. There were 4 pieces of equipment. There was a large swing that was metal, very heavy duty. Several kids could use it at once. There was a jungle gym. There was a large metal slide, and there was a thing that we called the merry-go-round. And the deal was with the merry-go-round was to get a kid to go in the middle part of it. It went in a sort of triangle towards the center. If you got a kid who would go in the middle and then run, the thing would go like crazy. And one day, I let go of the handlebar in front and went flying and ended up over by the swing set. It wasn't that far, but it was a nice trip.
Nice, stunning, shocking.
Well, it was a little surprising. I didn't expect I was going to go flying, or I would probably not have done it. But it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun, and there was a lot of dodgeball playing in those days, and that's one of the major activities there. On rainy days, we would go downstairs into sort of the long area between the 2 sides of the building where the book stacks are now, and we euphemistically called that the gym. Miss Nichols would come some days. She was our sort of gym teacher who would come periodically, and she would we'd do a few little exercises or whatever it was we did, or bounce balls around and that sort of thing. Miss Nichols later became the dean of girls at the high school, and if you look in the old yearbooks back in the late 50s and probably the late 50s, maybe even as late as the early 60s, you can see her picture. And the principal here when I first started was Miss Graham, and then she retired after my first year, and then Miss Gaffney was principal here for a number of years, and I think everybody liked her. I think, as far as I know, they did. I liked her. This room that we're in now actually was the principal's office with a fireplace, and then over on the other side of the room was where the secretary was, Mrs. Hines. She was a little short lady, and I used to think that she typed up enough copies of every announcement and bulletin so that all the kids could have it. I didn't realize that she used a mimeograph machine. So I thought she was really pretty amazing, but I found out the machine helped, so what can you say? It did. And it wasn't that she was hiding it. I just had no idea that that's how it happened. There were also times when the school would put on productions. Excuse me. These were done by the adults as fundraising, PTA kinds of things. And one of them was well, they used to be called, I think it was their regular name, was the Highland Fling, obviously because it was the Highland School. And mothers and everything would go, and they would sing and do performances, and there would be little skits. I remember one of them was one of the songs they sang was "The Happy Wanderer," was a popular one, and my mother was involved in it, which means they took people whether they could sing or not. My mother wasn't a good singer. In third grade, I had Miss Priestley. And that was the year when we did a lot of stuff, beginning our study of American history. We used to sing songs like the Erie Canal and all those kinds of old-fashioned, folk songs. And we also learned how to do square dancing. And I guess I was a pretty good square dancer. I never did it after I did it in elementary school, but there were there was one group of one square dancing eightsome, and I was in that group, and we demonstrated to the parents some of the square dancing that we had done. Stephen Mitchell was the boy who was my dance partner. I don't remember who the other kids were who were in that group, but it was kind of fun. We would dig for the oyster and dive for the clam and do-si-do and swing your partner and all sorts of things. It was good.
Down in the room where the stacks are now, your gymnasium?
No, we actually did it upstairs, and where the main children's room was actually an auditorium, and there was a raised stage there. Miriam Barkley, whose room we're in right now, the history room at the library, also came here to school and gave presentations on writing history and on all sorts of different artifacts to the kids. I think Miriam is the person who kindled my interest in history, in American history, and it was right after that, I think, that we went to Sturbridge Village, my parents and our family, and so I really became very interested in history because of Miriam's talks. She was wonderful. She'd bring in warming pans and all sorts of different artifacts, whether candle molds, and explain to us how people used to live a long time ago and what they had to do to get things accomplished.
Well, I think Reading school children still see those things because most of her belongings are now at the Reading Antiquarian Society at the Parker Tavern, and the third graders all take field trips to the Parker Tavern. So
great.
They still see those same candle molds that you saw when you were in elementary school. And the second person who's mentioned this local history room, which is the Miriam Barkley and Eleanor Bishop history room. The other was in reference to Eleanor Bishop.
Yes. Yep. Well, she didn't come to schools. I think Miriam had been a teacher at one point in her career, and so she was a little bit more perhaps naturally attracted and inclined to go to the schools and talk with the kids.
Is there anything else you can tell us about it, or perhaps maybe a little bit about when you were on the original committee that was a building committee for the library that change the Highland School into the current Reading Public Library?
The school had been closed, I believe, shortly after Proposition 2.5 rolled around. And as many people who've lived in town for a long time will remember, the old library, which is now a part of the town hall, it was very small. It had been added on to at one point, sometime I guess in the 1940s or 50s, and it was terribly inadequate for the library. I can remember from the time I was in high school until the 80s, you would see more and more things leaving the library. For example, there used to be study tables, and they had to remove those to put bookshelves in. And pretty soon it was basically just shelving and very little space for anybody to do anything. So attempts have been made to turn the community center, which is now, I don't know, the schoolhouse condominiums, there have been attempts to turn that into the library. And one of those came incredibly close. It almost came to fruition in the 70s. But that didn't happen. Meanwhile, the books kept piling up higher and deeper at the library, and I actually, when I say the shelves were overflowing, I really mean that literally. Books were stacked on the floor, sometimes 2 or 3 deep, in piles perhaps 2 or 3 feet high. If you wanted a book that wasn't available, or that was not on the shelf, you had to say to somebody, "I'm looking for this book," and they would have to send somebody there to go through the piles of books that were on the floor to try to find what you wanted. When this building became empty, the town needed to decide what to do with it. So a committee was formed, and Henry Higgett, who was the chairman of that committee, was instrumental in suggesting that this could become a library. And people were quite elated by that because, first of all, we needed a library. Second of all, we wanted to preserve the building. So structural engineers were called in, and all kinds of work was done, and the study committee went on for several months over the summer. And the ultimate conclusion was that it could be turned into a library, that it would be able to be done. But that to do that, we would not probably be able to do much book loading on the first or second floors. That most of the books would need to be stacked in the basement because the building wasn't structurally designed to house books. So that was how it came about. We also knew, too, that somehow or other we weren't going to get this passed through town meeting if the price wasn't right. So we kept saying to ourselves, Marvin Rosenthal was actually one of the chairs on the second phase of this committee, which was actually after the decision had been made that it could be turned into a library. We had to figure. We decided that it couldn't be more than $1 million. It had to be under $1 million, or the town wouldn't buy into it. So I believe the price for converting the building was $997,000 and change. So it was under that magical $1 million mark. But there were a number of things that weren't done at the time. They did not do air conditioning, as I recall. And there were some other things, too, that weren't. I mean, the windows were not redone. They used the same windows. We tried very hard to save as many historical aspects of the building. As you can see, the beadboard paneling here, the tin ceilings in the main reading room, the staircases with the bead boarding up those. We did almost as much as we possibly could to maintain as much as possible. The Historical Commission was involved with this all along so that we had their input and their understanding about what would be done. So we weren't trying to do anything that they wouldn't approve of. But and it all finally came to fruition in March of 1984 with the moving of the books and the opening of the new library, and everybody was just delighted. First of all, it solved a long-standing problem, preserved a wonderful building, and it gave the town so much more space at that time, although clearly the time has come for something to be done again. But in the 30 years since, a lot has changed. No one could have envisioned in 1984 the technology that we have today or the way the needs have changed. But being able to preserve the building in the 1980s was great, because the other two school buildings that had been no longer used, which was Prospect, excuse me, and Lowell Street, both of those buildings were torn down, and the properties were sold for housing lots. And we had a lot of support also from the neighbors in the 1980s to maintain the building as it was. They didn't want housing to go here. They were pretty enthusiastic and supportive of having the library here. I won't say that everybody was, but we did have neighborhood representation on the committee, and you know, people were pretty happy about it, because I think they liked the building and they didn't want to see it go away.
I visited the Cohasset Library recently, where they have made a wonderful library out of a school building and left a lot of very nice features of the architecture. Maybe taking away a little bit more of the hallway aspect that we have left in this building. But I think there's some possibilities for this building in the future. We'll see what happens when they vote.
We will.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to tell us, Cherrie? This is great.
I think that's probably well, one last thing, I guess. In the auditorium, which is now the children's room, there was a small section of that was set aside with bookcases, which was used as a little tiny library for the school. There weren't a lot of books there, but I do remember there's some biographies of famous Americans. Kit Carson comes to mind. So we would go there periodically to look at the books and you know, pick up something that we might like, and we could take it out for a period of time. I don't recall who did the taking out, whether the teachers helped us sign out or whether a mother came in to volunteer, but there weren't very many books there. It was, I mean, if there were 500 books, that would probably be a lot. But no, they're pretty much geared for kids.
Yeah, there was a library later on.
Yes, I'm sure there was.
In the back of what's now the meeting room. The school librarian was here yesterday and told us from the teacher's lounge about that library. So
Yeah.
it was very interesting to hear, and I think some of the classrooms may have been changed a bit from time to time. Some little reading rooms set up in what were former classroom spaces. So there have been modifications in the building as a school, and the one thing I think that has changed here as a library was the entryway was built on so that when people walked into the library, the cold air didn't come right in with them.
Right, right.
But that's about the only thing that has been changed since 1984.
Yeah. Well, the lack too of the towers after the fire, the cones on top of the towers was a sad loss, I think.
And the gables on the roof. There were windows in the attic.
Oh, really?
Pictures
I
before
don't.
the fire.
Yeah. I imagine there were many changes that were probably done then, because they were able to do them. While they're in doing some things, they might as well repair some other stuff at the same time. So, but it's been a great building, and it served the town well for over 100 years, and hopefully it's got a long future ahead of it.